Hello, my fellow humans, and welcome to another episode of the Tiger Den podcast with your host, Kyle Tiger Jarvis. This episode is going to be interesting because there's a lot of censorship taking place around these particular topics right now. So, it's possible that this could be the last Tiger Den episode on YouTube. I don't know how YouTube is going to react to me attempting to post this video. I am looking into alternative outlets. But before I get going, I want to actually speak directly to the YouTube censors. In this episode, I'm going to talk about facts. Actual studies, peer-reviewed studies, and I'm sourcing a lot of this information, virtually all of this information, from mainstream sources, including the CDC, CBS News, CNBC, MSN, and the Virology Journal and BMJ Journal in the UK. So these are legitimate sources. At the very least, what we're led to believe as citizens are legitimate sources. So, YouTube, if your goal is to censor the CDC itself, okay, then have at it, because that's a slippery slope. And this is information that needs to be discussed openly and freely by people who are interested in having these kinds of discussions. And I hope that you will respect the fact that we should have that right. And that I'm not saying anything controversial in this episode. I'm merely sharing information. You will not hear me say that people should not take the COVID vaccine. I will not say that. You're not going to hear me bad talk the vaccine itself. Okay? But what I am going to do is give pertinent background information about Big Pharma, Fauci, and a lot of studies that are coming out that make the vaccine hesitant crowd more than justified. And this should be my right as an American citizen to share this information publicly on my channel. And so with that, hopefully we can get through this, and there's a lot to cover, so I'm going to get right into it. And I think Fauci's a good place to start because of the fact that he's been propped up by the mainstream media and clearly by the government as sort of the figurehead of the Get Vaxxed effort and of the COVID response effort. And so, because of the attention and the platform that he's been given, Fauci is seen as this infallible source. But I want to talk a little bit about why he is far from infallible. And so let's talk about it. First of all, I want to start with his comments on masks. Now, some of you might not remember that back in 2020, I believe it was the spring of 2020, there was a lot of talk about whether people should be wearing masks, and all of Asia was basically wearing a mask at this point. And you'll hear people say, oh, well, they wear masks all the time in Asia anyway. And that might be true, but not to the extent that they were wearing them at this time. It was widely reported that literally almost every single person in Asia was wearing a mask in the most affected areas. But Fauci went on TV and gave an interview that everybody saw that said no one should be wearing a mask, walking around wearing a mask in America right now. He kind of downplayed the effectiveness of masks. He said you might block a droplet or two, but it's not going to be anything. It's a negligible difference. Okay, so that's Dr. Fauci saying, don't wear a mask. Masks are not helpful. Fast forward, right, to I think it was late summer of last year, so just a few months down the road. And by this time, everybody was wearing masks. Mask was the big thing. Wear a mask everywhere you go. You got to mask up. And so Fauci was interviewed again, and he was asked about, why the discrepancy? Why are you saying masks now, and, that they're helpful, but that they weren't helpful, and that you shouldn't be wearing them just a few months ago? And his answer is extremely revealing. And you have to release yourself from any biases that you have before you analyze information like this. Okay? So what he said was that one of the reasons we did that, he said, in other words, saying masks were not helpful, was because they didn't want there to be a run on personal protective equipment. They wanted to protect the supply for frontline healthcare workers. There's a couple of huge problems with this. Number one, you cannot protect one class of people over another. That should be obvious. So basically what he was saying is, we wanted to protect healthcare workers from possibly becoming infected with COVID and dying. But we didn't give a fuck about anybody else, so we said, hey, masks don't work. So that one group of people could have access to the limited mask supply that we had at that time. That's just wrong. Furthermore, right, there's a logic problem there, if you think about it. There's a logic disconnect. Okay? If masks weren't helpful, he said, oh, well, at that time we didn't really know whether masks were helpful or not. This was his other excuse. Okay? So first of all, we've already established that all of Asia was wearing a mask at that point. All right? So there wasn't a lot of debate at that point about the effectiveness of masks, at least in the mainstream medical community. But more importantly, if masks weren't effective, or you didn't have enough information to say that they were effective at that time, why the need to protect the PPE supply for healthcare workers? What difference does it make if masks aren't helpful? It just makes no sense. But the more important piece of that is that he chose to protect one class of people over another. What he could have said was, originally, in the spring of last year, he could have said, well, we do believe that masks are at least somewhat helpful, and we would encourage people to wear them. However, we have a supply issue, and so we would ask that people not buy them all off the shelves. They could have placed purchase limits like they did on other items during this time. Okay? They could have advised people to make their own. As we know, mask making became one of the most successful economic stories of COVID and the shutdowns. Startup companies making their own masks. And so if you had told people that, they could have been innovative and adapted to the situation, like they ended up doing anyway, when there weren't enough masks by the time they said to wear them. Okay? So, this is a major issue. You can't have your top health official being paraded out to lie in order to protect one group of people over another, without giving them all the information so that we can all make a choice that's best for us. And that's just flat out wrong, no matter how you slice it. And presumably, some people, God knows how many, got COVID because they didn't mask up. Maybe they're an older person, or maybe they had comorbidities that are susceptible to COVID infection. Presumably, some of those people maybe could have prevented becoming infected if they had been told to mask up, but they weren't, so they didn't, and then they became infected and died. And that's on Fauci. There's really no other way to slice that. And this is what I mean when I say you have to suspend your biases. Because I know a lot of you out there listening to this, watching this, you want to respect Dr. Fauci, you want to believe him, you want to believe the image that's portrayed of this man. But the lies are stacking up, so let's keep it moving. Because it doesn't end there, right? And so, the other obvious area of concern when it comes to Fauci and his credibility centers around the gain-of-function research. And for those of you who don't know, the COVID virus itself, it turns out, and this is almost an absolute certainty now upon the release of internal NIH documents. All right, that's Fauci's organization, the NIH. And what those documents revealed is that contrary to what Fauci testified to in Congress, is that he facilitated directly, and the NIH directly facilitated, massive increases in funding for gain-of-function research. Okay? And if you don't know what gain-of-function is, what that basically means is a bunch of fucking crazy-ass scientists get together and say, hey, we're going to make a souped-up virus, alright, a souped-up synthetic supervirus, so that we can study it. And this will help us to learn how to fight future viruses. And so this is the justification for this sort of research. And yet, this isn't the first time that a virus got out. It's just the first time that it led to these consequences. But again, internal documents show from the Wuhan lab show that these viruses escape actually quite often, as much as once or twice a year. And so Fauci testified that they absolutely did not fund gain-of-function research at the Wuhan lab through the NIH. And now, internal leak of NIH documents says exactly the opposite. That they did in fact fund that research, heavily advocated for it, at the Wuhan lab. So he flat out lied. He testified before Congress and lied. Some of you might have seen the hearings with Ron Paul. They were entertaining to watch. But more importantly than that is what's under the surface of that. And what's under the surface is a big steaming fucking pile of lies. So, beyond that, and it's important to remember too, just a few months ago, if you suggested that the lab leak theory was legit, that really happened, you were a conspiracy theorist, and possibly even racist against Asian people, which is fucking insane. Absolutely insane. Somehow it's more racist to say that it came from a super lab, which is literally named the coronavirus lab. It's part of some long name, but coronavirus is literally in the name of the lab. It's what they study there. Somehow, suggesting that the virus came from there was racist, and suggesting that it came from a wet market with unfettered sale of exotic wildlife and such isn't. It wasn't racist to say that, because that was the theory originally. But here we are now, and it turns out the lab leak is actually what happened. So it's important to understand how the narrative shifts as the information comes out. You were a conspiracy theorist who should put on your tinfoil hat just a few months ago if you said this shit came from the fucking coronavirus super lab in Wuhan. Turns out we were right. That is where it came from. And Fauci lied about that directly, openly, blatantly to Congress. So, again, the reason I'm highlighting this is because of the fact that he's been propped up, that Fauci's been propped up as this reliable source and a voice of reason. And when you really dig in to his comments and his actions, he's anything but. And this is to say nothing, absolutely nothing, of the controversy surrounding him with the HIV epidemic and the AIDS epidemic in the 80s. He's heavily connected to that, but I'm not going to get into that. It's too much. You guys can look that up for yourselves if you want, or maybe I'll do a future episode about it if YouTube grants me the privilege of doing so. So, since we've sort of covered the biggest lies by Fauci, I want to move on to Big Pharma, because this is really the important piece of it, or certainly one of the most important pieces. What you guys have to understand, hopefully what you can understand, what you're willing to ponder, is that Big Pharma is one of the most nefarious industries in the world. And not only that, but they're the new big dogs on the block when it comes to lobbying and profits. Their industry has surpassed all others in recent years. So, when you talk about Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson and Moderna and all these other companies that are producing the vaccine, and people who have taken the vaccine look at those who are hesitant to do so and scratch their heads, well, let me explain why. Let's start with Pfizer. Pfizer, back in 2009, was the subject of a massive investigation by the U.S. Justice Department that resulted in the single largest fraud case settlement in American history, with a record-setting fine of $2.3 billion. And a summary of that story basically goes like this. Essentially, the settlement was the result of Pfizer illegally promoting certain pharmaceutical products. More specifically, Pfizer's subsidiaries, Pharma and Upjohn, agreed to pay $1.3 billion for violating FDA provisions in that it intended to defraud or mislead concerning its anti-inflammatory drug Bextra. The rules say you have to market the product for the specific use it was approved for by the FDA. Despite this, they, quote, promoted the sale of Bextra for several uses and dosages that the FDA specifically declined to approve due to safety concerns. The Pfizer said, fuck you, we're going to promote this shit however we want, because we'll make more money that way. As a result, they paid $1.195 billion, which at the time was the largest criminal fine ever imposed in the United States for any matter. Additionally, Pharma and Upjohn were fined $105 million for a total of $1.3 billion. At the same time, Pfizer also agreed to pay an additional $1 billion for illegal marketing of 4 separate drugs: Bextra, Geodin, which is an antipsychotic, Zyvox, an antibiotic, and Lyrica, an anti-epileptic drug. The lawsuit said that Pfizer, quote, caused false claims to be submitted to government healthcare programs for uses that were not medically accepted indications and therefore not covered by those programs. The civil settlement also resolves allegations that Pfizer paid kickbacks to healthcare professionals and providers to induce them to prescribe these as well as other drugs they knew to be harmful and that they knew they were promoting off use. And they paid off doctors to do that for them. The federal share of the civil settlement is $668 million plus. And the state Medicaid share of the settlement is over $331 million. This is the largest civil fraud settlement in history against a pharmaceutical company. And the largest total fine of any company ever at that time. The size and seriousness of this resolution, including the huge criminal fine of $1.3 billion, reflect the seriousness and scope of Pfizer's crimes, said Mike Laux, acting U.S. Attorney for the District of Massachusetts. Quote, Pfizer violated the law over an extensive time period. Furthermore, at the very same time Pfizer was in our office negotiating and resolving the allegations of criminal conduct by its then newly acquired subsidiary, Warner Lambert, Pfizer was itself in its other operations violating those very same laws. You can't make this shit up. Today's enormous fine demonstrates that such blatant and continued disregard of the law will not be tolerated. End quote. The investigation involved 6 whistleblowers who were paid a total of $102 million. And YouTube, in case you're listening, that comes straight from the U.S. Department of Justice website. So, hopefully you're not going to censor me over that source. A year later, Pfizer was sued by Blue Cross and Blue Shield in connection with the illegal marketing of those same 4 drugs. According to the lawsuit, Pfizer handed out, quote, misleading materials on off-label uses and sent over 5,000 doctors on trips to the Caribbean or around the United States and paid them $2,000 honoraria in return for listening to lectures about Bextra. I'm sure that didn't influence those doctors on whether to overprescribe Bextra after the fact. Surely not. But not that many doctors, only 5,000. No big deal, right? Despite Pfizer's claims that the, quote, company's intent was pure, end quote, in fostering a legal exchange of information among doctors, an internal marketing plan revealed that Pfizer intended to train physicians to, quote, serve as public relations spokespeople for Big Pharma. The case was settled in 2014 for $325 million. Another settlement, announced just a year later, 2010 I think, centered around Pfizer's Trovan meningitis trials in Nigeria, which adversely affected at least 200 people, although more than 600 filed suit. Quote, Pfizer has agreed to pay about $35 million of a $75 million settlement to the children affected by the trial, which took place in 1996. 11 children died. Let me read that again. 11 children died during Pfizer's trials of the drug, and Trovan was later banned in the US and Europe. That episode, actually, that whole incident, it says, may have inspired the movie The Constant Gardener. And that's from CBS News. YouTube. CBS News. In 2004, Pfizer was busted again for off-label marketing and kickback schemes, this time involving their drug Neurontin, which is a form of gabapentin. Basically, it illegally marketed the drug for people with bipolar disorder. The final settlement was $435 million, one of the largest ever at the time. Bipolar people, you know. Easy target for Big Pharma. Make a few bill off them, no problem. Let's keep it going. 2005. Lawsuit was filed against Wyeth, which was acquired by Pfizer in 2009. The lawsuit stemmed from the illegal off-label marketing of their drug Rapamune, specifically alleging that it, quote, targeted specific doctors and medical facilities to increase sales of Rapamune and tried to get transplant patients to change from their transplant drugs to Rapamune, and specifically targeted African Americans. According to the whistleblowers, Wyeth also provided doctors and hospitals that prescribed the drug with kickbacks such as grants, donations, and other money. In 2013, the company pleaded guilty to criminal misbranding violations under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. By August of 2014, it had paid $491 million in civil and criminal penalties related to Rapamune. Now you might say, okay, well, that was Wyeth, and Pfizer acquired that company after the fact. Okay, fair enough, but don't tell me Pfizer didn't know. Pfizer went ahead with that deal and acquired Wyeth anyway. They could have said, you know, your history's a little too messy for us. We don't like the way that you operate things. We really don't want to take on these assets and your organization because we feel like it's, you know, kind of a liability. But they didn't do that. They didn't do that. They knew this lawsuit was coming. They knew what Wyeth had done, and they acquired him anyway. Because Pfizer itself had been guilty of many of the same things. There's more. The Quigley Company, which sold asbestos-containing insulation products until the early 1970s, was acquired by Pfizer in 1968. As asbestos products were still being sold and installed. In June 2013, asbestos victims and Pfizer negotiated a settlement that required Pfizer to pay a total of $964 million. $430 million of which to the 80% of existing plaintiffs, and an additional $535 million into a settlement trust that will compensate future plaintiffs as well as the remaining 20% of plaintiffs with claims against Pfizer and Quigley. Future plaintiffs. Because they know. Pfizer also acquired a company, Shiley, I don't know if that's how it's pronounced, S-H-I-L-E-Y, that killed 500 people with faulty heart valves, and eventually paid out $10.75 million. More fun times with Pfizer. And by fun, I mean shit that'll kill you or seriously fuck you up. This time, it's about their drug Celebrex. BYU, Brigham Young, said a professor of chemistry, Dr. Daniel Simmons, discovered an enzyme in the 1990s that led towards the development of Celebrex. BYU was originally seeking a 15% royalty on sales, equating to $9.7 billion. A research agreement had been made between BYU and Monsanto, another wonderful, heartwarming organization that wants to privatize water and gives us all our frankenfood that's banned in 30 countries around the world, and who recently merged with Bayer. Monsanto, whose pharmaceutical business was later acquired by Pfizer to develop a better aspirin. The enzyme Dr. Simmons claims to have discovered would induce pain and inflammation while causing gastrointestinal problems, and Celebrex is used to reduce those issues. So he came up with an enzyme that induces these issues, and then he had a deal with the companies that made Celebrex to fix the issue. A 6-year battle ensued because BYU claimed that Pfizer did not give Dr. Simmons credit or compensation, while Pfizer claimed that it had met all obligations regarding the Monsanto agreement. In May 2012, Pfizer settled the allegations, agreeing to pay $450 million. So $450 million, $10.75 million, $964 million, $491 million, $435 million, $75 million, $325 million, and of course $2.3 billion. All separate settlements involving actions that Pfizer took that it knew it shouldn't have, that hurt people on purpose. So, and by the way, YouTube, that last bit of information came from Wikipedia. You're banning Wikipedia now. Let's move on to Johnson & Johnson. And the illegal marketing of risperidol. Juries in several U.S. states have found Johnson & Johnson guilty of concealing the adverse effects of Janssen Pharmaceuticals' antipsychotic medication risperidol, produced by its unit, in order to promote it to doctors and patients as better than cheaper generics, and of falsely marketing it for treating patients with dementia. Falsely marketing it to treat patients with dementia, not an approved use. Just like the other drug was not an approved use for people with bipolar, and they said, let's market it to them anyway because we'll make a fuck ton of money off it. They did the same thing to people with dementia. States that have awarded damages include Texas at $158 million, South Carolina at $327 million, Louisiana at $258 million, and most notably Arkansas with a $1.2 billion settlement. In 2010, the United States Department of Justice joined a whistleblower suit accusing Johnson & Johnson of illegally marketing risperidol through Omnicare, the largest company supplying pharmaceuticals to nursing homes. The allegations include that J&J were warned by the FDA not to promote risperidol as effective or safe for elderly patients, but they did so anyway, and that they paid Omnicare to promote the drug to care home physicians. Once again, we're paying off doctors and medical professionals. These, it's tough because I know you want to trust your doctor. I want to trust my doctor. I have a doctor, and I trust him. Generally speaking, I trust him. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't trust your doctor. But you shouldn't automatically trust your doctor just because he's a fucking doctor. The settlement was finalized on November 4th, 2013, with J&J agreeing to pay a penalty of around $2.2 billion, including criminal fines and forfeiture totaling $485 million, and civil settlements with the federal government and states totaling $1.72 billion. Johnson & Johnson has also been the subject to congressional investigations related to payments given to psychiatrists to promote its products and to ghostwrite articles. Notably, Joseph Biederman and his Pediatric Bipolar Disorder Research Unit. Once again, we're picking on bipolar. Easy target. Make a fuck ton of money off them. They're desperate. There's not a lot of effective medications for bipolar on the market. I know more about this than I ever cared to. It's tough. Bipolar medication is tough. It makes you lethargic. It makes you not feel like yourself. It makes you not want to do anything. It eases your symptoms, maybe, but it makes you feel like a lump of shit. And so when Big Pharma says, hey, try this, we've got this, give this a go. Of course, people with bipolar are going to say, Jesus, fuck, finally, okay, yeah, let me give it a whirl. It's fucking disgusting. Sticking with Johnson & Johnson, let's talk about the vaginal mesh implants. Tens of thousands of women worldwide have taken legal action against Johnson & Johnson after suffering serious complications following a vaginal mesh implant procedure. In 2016, the U.S. states of California and Washington filed a lawsuit against the company, accusing it of deception. More than 700 women began a class action against the company in federal court of Australia in 2017, telling the court that they, quote, suffered irreparable, debilitating pain after the devices began to erode into surrounding tissue and organs, causing infections and complications. The class action alleged that J&J, which, quote, aggressively marketed the implants, quote, failed to properly warn patients and surgeons of the risk or test the devices adequately, end quote. Emails between executives show that the company was aware of the risks in 2005, but still went ahead and made the product available. Are you catching on? In October of 2019, the company and its subsidiary, Ethicon Inc., reached a settlement with 41 states and the District of Columbia with no admission of liability in a suit alleging that it deceptively marketed the transvaginal surgical mesh devices. The suit also alleges that the company failed to disclose risks associated with the product, which Johnson & Johnson pulled from the market in 2012, 7 years after it knew that that product was harmful. The amount settled in the suit was about $117 million. And that comes from a CNBC article. You censoring CNBC now? YouTube? There's more. Let's talk about the baby powder. The Supreme Court on Tuesday rejected an appeal from Johnson & Johnson seeking to undo a $2.1 billion award against it over allegations that asbestos in its talc powder products, including baby powder, caused women to develop ovarian cancer. Well, Johnson & Johnson seems to hate women. All these products that fuck them up. Johnson & Johnson had asked the top court to review the penalty against it after the amount was upheld by the Missouri Supreme Court last year. A state appeals court earlier reduced the penalty against Johnson & Johnson from more than $4 billion. From $4 billion down to $2.1 billion. Johnson & Johnson said that it stopped selling its talc-based baby powder in the United States and Canada in May of 2020, just last year. A fucking year ago. With asbestos, which we've known since the 70s is fucking horrible for you and will kill you. They stopped selling it citing a reduced demand. Quote, fueled by misinformation around the safety of the product and a constant barrage of litigation advertising. The fucking balls on these people. The company had said that it is facing more than 21,800 lawsuits against it over its talc products. That number is now over 25,000 suits. Let's move on to GlaxoSmithKline. Now, you might say, well, why are we talking about them? Well, I'll tell you why. Because not only was GlaxoSmithKline contracted by the UK to supply them with 60 million doses of the COVID vax, but they also agreed to a $2.1 billion deal with the US to produce 100 million doses. So let's talk about them. So, GlaxoSmithKline has the dubious record of the single largest settlement in U.S. history at $3 billion. The charges from that led to that mostly centered around the illegal marketing, including antidepressants for kids under 18. Marketing of drugs, illegal marketing of drugs, antidepressants to kids under 18. The settlement also covered reporting false best prices and underpaying rebates owed under the Medicaid drug rebate program and kickbacks to physicians. There it is again. It's not just one of these companies that does this. They all fucking do it. Kickbacks to physicians to prescribe GSK's drugs. There were all expenses paid spa treatments and hunting trips for doctors and their spouses, speakers' fees at conferences, and payments for articles ghost-written by the company and placed by physicians in medical journals. So, it's difficult, right, when you look at that, to look at the studies and believe the science, okay, when it says right here that one of the largest big pharma companies on earth, so multiple of the biggest big pharma companies have done this, paid off doctors to overprescribe drugs, to ghostwrite articles for medical journals favorable to those drugs when they know already that that particular drug is harmful. And you want me to trust the science? I'm going to talk more about the science itself in a little bit here. The company set up a ghostwriting program called Casper, initially to produce articles about Paxil, but which was extended to cover Avandia. There's more. In 2012, the settlement included a criminal fine of over $242 million for failing to report safety data to the FDA about Avandia, a diabetes drug approved in 1999, and a civil settlement of over $657 million for making false claims about it. The Justice Department said that GlaxoSmithKline had promoted Avandia to physicians with misleading information, including that it conferred cardiovascular benefits despite an FDA-mandated label warning of cardiovascular risks. In '99, John Buse, a diabetes specialist, told medical conferences that the drug might carry an increased risk of cardiovascular problems. GSK threatened to sue him, called his university head of department, and persuaded him to sign a retraction. GSK raised questions internally about the drug's safety in 2000. Internally! And in 2002, the company ghost wrote an article in circulation describing a GSK-funded clinical trial that suggested the drug might have a beneficial effect on cardiovascular risk. From 2001, so that's 2 years after they had internal concerns about the cardiovascular risks of this drug. From 2001, reports began to link the thiazolid, I'm not even going to attempt that word, the class of drugs to which Avandia belonged, to heart failure. Not heart problems, heart failure. In April that year, GSK began a 6-year open-label randomized trial known as RECORD to examine the drug and cardiovascular events. 2 GSK meta-analyses in 2005 and 2006 showed an increased risk of cardiovascular problems with the drug. The information was passed to the FDA and posted on the company website, but not otherwise published, as they would have been required to do by FDA regulations. By December of 2006, Avandia had become the top-selling diabetes drug, with annual sales of $3.3 billion. Annual sales of that one drug, 3.3 billion. One company, one drug. It goes on and on. So, and this is a good transition into what this is really all about. Profits. Because the fact of the matter is, these massive, record-setting settlements mean jack shit to Big Pharma. It's a drop in the fucking bucket. What was the biggest one? 3 billion? 3 billion? Largest ever. Well, let's look at what these companies hauled in 2019. 1 year of sales. Profits. Johnson & Johnson, 82 billion. Pfizer, 52 billion. Bayer, 48 billion. Merck, 47 billion. GlaxoSmithKline, 44 billion. Sanofi, 40 billion. And AstraZeneca, 24 billion. You need to really understand how much money that is. In 1 year, they make half of what the richest person on earth is worth. That is an absolute fuck ton of money. And what it translates to is this. Lobbying. Big Pharma is the new news. They're the new big dog on the block. Big oil, big whatever, it can all fuck off. Big Pharma rules the roost now, the lobbying roost. It's become far and away the largest lobbying force in America, spending $306 million in 2020 alone. Second place is electronics manufacturing and equipment, big tech essentially, at $157 million. So basically, Big Pharma spends literally twice, basically twice the amount that its next closest lobbying competitor spends per year. That's an absolutely disgusting amount of money for an industry like Big Pharma to be handing over to politicians for favorable legislation, favorable everything. It's pay to play, just like it is with the doctors. Some of them, not all of them. So, let's talk a little bit about the science of all this. Let's talk about natural immunity. From Bloomberg, 8/27/21 article. Are you censoring Bloomberg now? YouTube? Bloomberg? The risk of a vaccine breakthrough Delta case was 13-fold higher than the risk of developing a second infection when the original illness occurred during January or February 2021. That's significantly more than the risk for people who were ill earlier in the outbreak. The Israeli study that this is in reference to represents, quote, the largest real-world analysis comparing natural immunity gained from an earlier infection. There's more from the Daily Mail. The study included 800,000 people split into 3 groups. Double jabbed, who'd never had COVID, unjabbed with a previous case of COVID, and one jab with a previous case of COVID. Overall, participants who were double jabbed were 5.96 times more likely to be infected and 7.13 times more likely to experience symptoms, including cough, fever, and shortness of breath, than people who were unvaccinated and who had COVID. They also looked at the likelihood of infection with vaccinations after 3 months. Researchers found in this instance the likelihood of infections at 13 times higher among immunized individuals. And they were 27 times more likely to experience symptoms. So in other words, it gets worse for vaccinated people after 3 months. And then after 6 months, you need the booster. But you're not protected at all. It's not doing shit for you. Right? So what are you going to do? You're going to get a booster every 6 months? Is that what they're going to ask us to do? Is that what you're going to do? People who had recovered from the virus and had been vaccinated were even less likely to have a breakthrough infection, for the record. So if you'd had COVID previously, that's really the main piece of protection. That's giving you more, stronger protection against reinfection than the jab does. That's from the Daily Mail, same day, 8/27/21. Is the Daily Mail okay, YouTube? Is that okay? Now let's talk about viral load. Studies are showing that fully vaxxed people carry the same amount of viral load as the unvaxxed. Imagine that. Quote, adults who have been fully vaccinated against COVID can carry the same viral load of the Delta variant as those who are unvaccinated, a preliminary analysis of UK data suggests. The latest results from the UK's National COVID-19 Infection Survey show that having 2 vaccine doses remains the most effective way to ensure protection against Delta. But, although people who are fully vaccinated have a lower risk of becoming infected, those infected with the Delta variant can carry similar virus levels of unvaccinated people. Of course, what they just said before that we know isn't necessarily true based on the information in this study I just talked about. So there's already misinformation in this article, right? But the important part that they say is that although people who are fully vaccinated have a lower risk of becoming infected, those infected with the Delta variant can carry similar virus levels as unvaccinated people, the data show. The author said that the implications for transmission were not yet clear, but suggested that the potential for fully vaccinated individuals to transmit the virus to others would make achieving herd immunity more of a challenge. Sarah Walker, professor of medical statistics and epidemiology at the University of Oxford and chief investigator of the survey, said, "We don't yet know how much transmission can happen from people who get COVID-19 after being vaccinated. For example, they may have high levels of virus for shorter periods of time. But the fact that they have high levels of virus suggests that people who aren't yet vaccinated may not be as protected from the Delta variant as we hoped." And again, this is information that's kind of flying in the face of this previous information that says that natural immunity, if you've been infected already, natural immunity is 13 times more effective against Delta. That's from the BMJ Journal of the UK. That's a medical journal. You censoring medical journals? I hope not. More on this. The CDC recently published an analysis of clusters of infections driven by the Delta variant of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. They found that a large portion of those infected in these clusters had been fully vaccinated. Furthermore, the viral loads were similar between those vaccinated and unvaccinated, suggesting that vaccinated individuals who develop breakthrough infections are very capable of transmitting the infection to others. And that's from the VCU website, Virginia Commonwealth University. and they took it straight from CDC. We censoring CDC? Let's talk about being symptomatic or being asymptomatic, and just how many people who get infected are in fact asymptomatic. In one cruise ship coronavirus outbreak, more than 80% of people who tested positive for COVID-19 did not show any symptoms of the disease, according to the new paper published in the journal Thorax. Out of 217 people on board, 128 tested positive for COVID-19, but only 24 of those people showed symptoms prior to testing. The remaining 104 people, 81% of those who tested positive, had not experienced any symptoms, the researchers report. That's from Time magazine. We're not censoring Time magazine now, are we? More. A UK study finding that more than 2/3 of people who tested positive for the virus were asymptomatic on the day they took the test. University College London researchers studied data collected by the UK statistics body, the Office for National Statistics, which had been regularly collecting coronavirus testing data from thousands of British households during the pandemic as part of its, quote, infection survey. The survey tests households whether they have symptoms or not. The study, which was peer-reviewed, looked at 36,061 individuals who took a coronavirus test as part of the infection survey. So they're not just asking them, they also took a test. Between the 26th of April and the 27th of June 2020. It found that 86.1% of those who tested positive for the virus did not report, quote, core symptoms associated with the virus: cough, fever, loss of taste or smell, and the shortness of breath on the day that they took the test. Out of the 115 people that received the positive coronavirus result, only 16 reported the main symptoms that we associate with the virus. That's from CNBC, October 8th, 2020. More. For the new study, which was published in the journal Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, sounds prestigious. On February 10th, the researchers reviewed cases recorded in New York City from March to June. They concluded that only around 13 to 18% of COVID cases end up yielding significant symptoms, which means that around 80% of those who get infected with COVID are asymptomatic, or at least experience such mild symptoms that they don't realize they're infected. That's from Best Life Online, February 17th, 2021. But clearly the information taken was from the medical journal Proceedings, or science journal I should say, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Is this what we're censoring now? YouTube? Science journals? Let's talk about asymptomatic transmission. Or more importantly, the lack thereof. From the CDC. We determined secondary attack rates among close contacts of 59 asymptomatic and symptomatic coronavirus disease case patients by presymptomatic and symptomatic exposure. We observed no transmission, not a little bit of transmission, not some transmission. We observed no transmission from asymptomatic case patients and highest SAR through presymptomatic exposure. Rapid quarantine of close contacts with or without symptoms is needed to prevent presymptomatic transmission. In this cluster of COVID-19 cases, little to no transmission occurred from asymptomatic case patients. Presymptomatic transmission was far more frequent than asymptomatic transmission. The fact that we did not detect any laboratory-confirmed SARS-CoV-2 transmission from asymptomatic case patients is in line with multiple studies. Some studies may be prone to misclassify pre-symptomatic cases as asymptomatic, leading to heterogeneous reporting of SAR of asymptomatic cases because of different case definitions or differential duration of follow-up. In our study, we used a very sensitive case definition for symptomatic cases that did not require specific symptoms such as fever, to be present. Also, the timing of our study would have enabled detection of late onset symptoms, which gives us confidence in our classification of exposure groups. And again, that's a CDC study. There's 5 different names attached to that: Bender, Brandy, Hull, Buchholz, and Zeidelman. Another recent study from the Virology Journal. We're going to censor this. There was a retrospective contact study aiming to estimate the transmission rate of COVID-19 by tracing contacts in symptomatic, pre-symptomatic, and asymptomatic patients. History of patients' contacts during a 24-hour appearance before appearance of symptoms or infection confirmation was traced for disease transmission. Overall, a total of 201 COVID-19 patients had contact with 7,168 people in a 24-hour span, with an average of 35.66 contacts per patient, ranging from a minimum of 4 to a maximum of 87 contacts. Out of that 7,168 persons met, infection was detected in 64. Out of 7,168 contacts, infection was detected in 64. That's 0.89%. Are you fucking listening? I hope so. For the 155 symptomatic patients, a total of 5,611 contacted persons were traced before appearance of symptoms in the last 24 hours, with an average of 36.2 meetings per patient. The infection was transmitted in 63 out of more than 5,000, 5,600. That's 1.12%. With 98.88% remaining uninfected. And those are symptomatic patients. So pre-symptomatic and asymptomatic are both very low transmission rates, with asymptomatic being extremely low, less than 1%. Statistically, the transmission rate by pre-symptomatic patients was found to be significantly higher than the transmission rate by asymptomatic individuals. In the studied population, the risk of pre-symptomatic and asymptomatic transmission of COVID-19 was low, with transmission risks of 1.12% and 0.6% respectively. Pre-symptomatic infection becomes very rare in contacts made longer than 6 hours before onset of symptoms. The infection transmission is traced as long as about 9 hours before the appearance of clear symptoms in the patients, but the incidence rate was as low as about 0.02% of the total contacts in that period. And again, this is from the Virology Journal, published July 3rd of this year. So, when you add this all up and you do the math here, it really doesn't add up. And, what I come up with here is, if as much as 80% or more of infections are asymptomatic, and if asymptomatic transmission almost never happens, and even pre-symptomatic transmission is incredibly rare, and if natural immunity is at least 13 times as effective as just the jab alone, doesn't this mean a couple of things? And also, if the vaxxed and unvaxxed alike can carry the same viral load and be just as contagious, a few things stand to reason here. One would be that we've probably all already had COVID, whether we realized it or not. And you've heard some scientists and some doctors and experts say this, that eventually we're all going to get it. Everybody's going to have it at some point. Most of us probably already have. If 80 to 85% are asymptomatic, and so if most of us have already had it, then most of us have natural immunity. And we know how effective that is now. More effective than just the jab. But just the jab may not even be a thing if most of us have already had it, even if we didn't know it at the time. Do you see the logic disconnect here? And so the question becomes, what the fuck do I need this shot for? I can't think of a good reason. Now, if you want to take it, that's your choice, and I support you. That's your right. If you want to take the shot, then you should take it. Take it. And I hope it works out. But no one should be telling anyone else that they have to take it, that they should take it. And be shaming each other. Shaming people who don't take it. And calling them conspiracy theorists and all this bullshit. None of which I've even remotely touched on. Of which there is some that is worth looking into. But this episode ain't about that. It's nonsensical logic. It goes nowhere. It's circular. And again, I'm not bad-mouthing the vax here. And I'm not saying don't get it. What I'm saying is, if you don't want to get it, or if you have doubts, or if you're hesitant, that is also your right. And no one should be fucking with you over that. The government included. So, really, we can't think of this as a red or a blue issue. It's not. I'm neither. And if I was one, I've only ever been blue. Voted blue every time I voted. I don't do that anymore. I don't vote for either one. Because I think they're both corrupt as fuck. And if you don't think so, then I would suggest that you've got some digging to do. You've got some homework. A lot, actually. But this issue here is not about red or blue. It's not about politics. It's about personal bodily autonomy. Probably the single most important right that we have as humans. And to shame people who, as we've seen, based on all of this information, have very legitimate reasons to be concerned, is really fucked up. And if you find yourself becoming one of those people, I hope you think about this and take a look in the mirror and have a good long think with yourself about all this. The sanctimony over this whole thing, I hate to say it, but the left, I don't recognize it anymore. I really don't. Because most of it's coming from that side. And it's disheartening. Because it alienates those of us that it would otherwise bring into the fold. But they're losing me more and more every day. They lost me years ago. But that gap grows by the day. A lot of the people that you hear pushing the vax and mandatory vaccinations are the same people that you hear saying Black Lives Matter, Me Too, etc. mental health rights, hold government accountable, all that, right? Big Pharma killed Nigerian children. They fucking killed children. They targeted African Americans with certain drugs that they knew to be harmful. They gave thousands of women ovarian cancer with baby powder that it knew to be harmful. So if you think Big Pharma gives a single fuck about black lives or about women's rights or about anybody or about anything other than their bottom line billion-dollar profits, I don't know what to tell you, because the evidence overwhelmingly suggests the opposite. They don't give a single fuck. In fact, they will sacrifice your life. Do you have any idea how many people die from prescription drug use each year? It's a lot. It's a horrifying number. They don't care. They care about profits and increasing their power. And it's hard to believe government when they say that these mandates and this extreme push to get the vax is about health and safety, when they exempt members of Congress as well as their staff and their aides from that mandate. But all the grunts have to get it. Not the legislative branch, who are already the privileged class. They're not required. They're not subjected to this mandate. The judicial branch, also exempt. We wouldn't want to tell judges what to do now, would we? Right? That's going too far. And our elected representatives. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi shared in April that Congress couldn't mandate the vaccine among members and said it was a, quote, matter of privacy as to whether members of Congress were vaccinated or not. It's funny. So she wants privacy for her and her colleagues as to whether they've been vaccinated or not. But for the rest of us, you need a fucking certificate to go certain places. Do you think members of Congress need those same certificates to get into those same places? Ask yourself that. That's from MSN, by the way, that Nancy Pelosi quote. And the information about it being a matter of privacy. And here's another quote from that article. There is no precise number of how many Senate and House members have been vaccinated, but estimates remain high, with many saying they have taken the shot. Saying they have taken the shot, because everybody knows that one thing politicians never do is lie or mislead. They're truthful individuals. COVID's rough, no doubt. And no doubt people have died and people have gotten sick. I'm not a COVID denier. I don't believe COVID's a hoax. I don't believe that. But I do believe it's being used against us as an excuse for other agendas. Where does it end? You know, I see a lot of people saying, hey, if you didn't take the jab and you get COVID, you should be denied medical care. That is so incredibly fucked up. So fucked up that it's hard to even express. Possibly sociopathic. if you find yourself saying that, whew, man, you got some serious fucking self-evaluation to do. And ask yourself, a drunk driver who smashes into another car and kills someone and is also themselves gravely injured, do they deserve medical care? Does a diabetes patient who ate Big Macs and Fruit Loops their whole life, do they deserve medical patient when they get sick on the verge of death? How about a hang glider who takes the glider out on a day that's not so windy, crashes, breaks 8 ribs and both his legs? Does he deserve medical care? Hey man, you knew the risks when you ate that Big Mac, when you took the glider out today. There's not much wind. When you drove drunk, you knew the risk. So I know you're on death's door here, but sorry, we can't help you because this could have been prevented. Is that where we're at? It sounds kind of absurd and extreme, no? I want to read a bit from this ESPN article about Golden State Warriors star Andrew Wiggins. Wiggins has been in the league for a few years. He's a pretty good player. I think he made an all-star team. And he's a pretty quiet dude. He's not one of these players that you hear a lot from off the court. He's not a loud guy. He doesn't get in trouble. He's just a guy who goes to work and does his job. Sorry, this is actually from CNN. So hopefully we're not censoring CNN. This is yesterday. Golden State Warriors forward Andrew Wiggins has said he felt like he had no choice but to get the COVID-19 vaccine. Wiggins told NBC Sports in March that he wasn't getting vaccinated unless he was forced to. He applied for a religious exemption, but the NBA denied that request last month. However, Warriors head coach Steve Kerr confirmed on Sunday that Wiggins had received the vaccine. And speaking for the first time since getting vaccinated, the Canadian basketball player, I'm not sure why they feel the need to identify him as Canadian. If they really want to identify him, they should call him Canadian African, because that's what he is. He's African Canadian. Basketball player said that he felt like he had to do so to be able to play for his team. I feel like the only options were to get vaccinated or not play in the NBA, Wiggins said after the Warriors' preseason opening win over the Trailblazers on Monday night. It was a tough decision. Hopefully, it works out in the long run, and in 10 years I'm still healthy. In September, the NBA warned the Warriors, along with the New York Knicks and the Brooklyn Nets, that new COVID-19 policies set by local governments will prohibit any unvaccinated player from playing in home games in New York City and San Francisco. And though 95% of the league is vaccinated, according to the NBA, there are still a few holdouts, and it could cost them. The NBA announced in September that unvaccinated players who do not comply with local vaccination mandates will not be paid for games they miss. It feels good to play, but getting vaccinated, that's going to be something that stays in my mind for a long time, Wiggins said. It's not something I wanted to do, but kind of forced to. The NBA pointed out that it was local San Francisco mandates requiring players to get the vaccination in order to play games in indoor stadiums in the city. Wiggins, who received the one-dose Johnson & Johnson shot, said he doesn't hold anything against the team. They didn't make the rule, but I guess to do certain stuff, to work, I guess you don't own your body. That's what it comes down to. If you want to work in society today, then I guess they made the rules of what goes in your body and what you do. Hopefully, there's a lot of people out there that are stronger than me and keep fighting and stand for what they believe in. And hopefully, it works out for them. No one. I don't care who you are or what you do, professional athlete or otherwise. No one should be made to feel that they have done something to or with their body that they didn't want to. And that to not do so threaten their livelihood. Now you'll say, well, cry me a river, he's a professional athlete, he's worth millions. Okay, fine, fair enough. He's fucking 26 years old. He's in his prime. These are his prime years for playing the game that he loves in which he gets paid handsomely to do so. These are the best years, the best chance he has to maximize the talent that he was given. And in order to not be denied that for himself and his family, and sometimes these players have big families and a lot of friends and so forth to take care of, who kind of expect you to take care of them when you become rich and famous. No one, I don't care if it's Andrew Wiggins or your fucking plumber, no one should be made to feel they have done something with their body that they did not want to. It's just wrong. And especially when the science does not support making them do that. 95% of the league is vaccinated. What the fuck are they worried about? They carry the same amount of viral load. They're just as contagious if they become reinfected. It just makes no sense. So, the fear that we, as a population, collectively allow to control us, it's powerful, man. It really is. And people are easier to control when they're afraid. And even more so when they're fearful and divided. Which is what we obviously are. But in truth, we're not. In truth, most of us want the same things in life and for each other. But we allow the media and the government and big business, big pharma, to drive the wedge between us. A liar like Fauci. An industry like big pharma with oceans of blood on its hands. Committed horrible, horrible acts on purpose to make a buck. But trust the science, yeah? Right? Who the fuck are you kidding? Not me. And hopefully not yourself. You know, as someone I love very much said not so long ago, because I don't want to. And that should be enough. So friends, I'll end it there. And I thank you for being with me. This is probably my most important episode yet. And I don't know what's going to happen because YouTube, I know you're cracking down. But hopefully, some of you will get to see this and you start to think. And maybe realize that the official narrative is not all it's cracked up to be. So I'll leave you with that. And I look forward to seeing you all again soon. In the meantime, question everything. And I'll see you in the Tiger Den.